Holly Cotton here, and I always love going into certain places because I meet unique people and people doing unique things. Today, we're talking about amazing, not even unique, but let me introduce you guys. Tonya Duncan Ellis is going to be my guest today, and she actually was doing promo for her book that she wrote about Juneteenth, which she will tell us all about. I'm so amazed at just the momentum that she had with this book. I love seeing all of that. So, welcome, Miss Tonya Duncan Ellis.
Hi, Holly. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yes, of course. Okay, so before we get into the Juneteenth book, because that was the way that we were at Channel 2 and we were all in the green room chit chatting. And she's like, yeah, I have this book. And, she was like kind of just downplaying it or whatever. She wasn't talking about, she had a book that was all over the place and that she was doing press about it. So, go back and rewind and tell us how you started where you realized that you wanted to be an author. Were you always an author? Go back, tell us the story about how we are here today.
Okay. Well, I actually, from the time I was a little girl, I loved writing. And when I was 10, I won a writing competition at my school. And back then, I had never met an author. So that wasn't really in the realm of possibility for me. But I thought, well, maybe I could write for a newspaper as a journalist, because way back when we all got newspapers, everyone read the newspaper, unlike today. And so my teachers encouraged me. I continued writing. And when I was 14, an article was published in my hometown newspaper. And I studied literature and language in college. I did internships at newspapers, and I worked for a while as a newspaper reporter. And then when I got married, I have 3 children, and when I was sharing books with them, I noticed a gap in the diversity as far as the stories we would read. And especially my youngest son hated reading, which for me was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this, because I always have a book in my hand. And I said, you know what, maybe I could write a book that would be interesting to him and a little bit more relatable. And this was kind of like a dream of mine to write a book anyway. So I wrote a chapter book called Sophie Washington, Queen of the Bee. And it's about a little girl in Houston and all her friends. And it's kind of like episodic, kind of like a sitcom. There are 13 books in the series. And in each book, the children solve different problems, like being a good friend, standing up to bullies, fitting in. And they deal with different things that tweens deal with in problems, even playing video games, social media, things like that. So those actually caught on. And especially during the pandemic, I shared them online, and they were purchased worldwide. And I sold over 175,000 copies of the books. So with that, I started learning about writing picture books during that time. And I wrote the book that you saw, They Built Me for Freedom, the story of Juneteenth in Houston's Emancipation Park during that time. So it's been a process of many years, probably about 10 years, that I've been writing children's books. And I also, in the meantime, wrote for a Houston family magazine. I wrote feature articles prior to writing the Sophie Washington series chapter books.
Mm. Okay, see, I didn't even know any of that. I was like, did she just pick up the book one day? Pick up or well, now we can't even say pick up a pen because now it's open a laptop and start typing. So, what I wanted to ask you also, you said that there weren't a lot of books for your kids that were relatable. And so I know you as an African American woman, were there any authors that are doing what you're doing that are Black women, or any authors that are like children's authors that were African American that your kids were like, oh, wow, I want this author or whatever? Or were you kind of like breaking the barriers for that?
Now, today, there was a call during the pandemic. And I was kind of part of that movement where we were challenging the publishing industry to include authors of color, because with African Americans in, I believe, 2020, less than half the books that featured children of color were written by African Americans. And there was a big outcry about that during the pandemic. And since then, I think last year the numbers have increased to up to 80 to 90%. So I will give them kudos for that. But when my kids were reading, there were not, I can name maybe one or two books, one Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, that featured African American kids. And those books were stories of trauma, stories of, people who were enslaved, sharecroppers, and things like that. So it was still difficult for my kids to relate to those books. And now there's been a call for writing more books about Black joy and just showing African Americans living their lives and not centering on trauma.
And
So for my kids, that's why they kind of couldn't relate, because they're suburban kids from Houston. So though we share all this history with them, it was hard for them to relate to books with kids that were looking like them, that were out.
and I was going to actually say, to kind of sidebar what you said, was I remember, not maybe, I think it was when Will Smith did that Emancipation movie. Everyone was kind of like, oh my gosh, enough with the slave movies. Like, no one can relate to that. And I get it. It's a cultural thing, because you do want people to remember, like, hey, 150 years ago, this is what was going on. But I love that you did make that point, because you're right. We have these suburban kids, they can't relate. Even my kids, I'm like, let me tell you guys what it was like before cell phones. And you're like, what? So what, how you call people, so even that, and that's just because I'm still young and fine, Tonya. I'm still young. But even that, we're talking about 15, 20 years ago. So my next question that I wanted to ask was, whenever you wrote your first book, can you go back? Because that's why I wrote my book, Ink and Imagination, because everyone is always like, how did you write a book? How do you write a book? How do you write a book? I was like, say less. Let me write a book about how to write a book. Now you guys can buy the book and learn on your own. But of course, we want to, extend the ladder down. So can you go into how you structured it? What was the thought process, and how did you start typing, or were you making notes? What was that actual process for you when you did the first Sophie book?
So with that, I said I want to write a series. So I envisioned it as a series when I came up with the idea for the book. And I structured it similarly to books that my kids were reading. So they liked short chapter books, and the books that they read were about 100 pages. They had 10 to 20 chapters. So I said, that's how these books will be. And they're going to have them learning different lessons in each book. And that's what I encourage people to do. If you want to write in a certain genre, like say you want to write a memoir, you should read different memoirs and study how they're structured. And then you can formulate that when you're writing your own book. So that's what I did with my Sophie Washington series. I looked at chapter books that were similar to what I was wanting to write, and I read many books. So I got a feel for what the content was, how the language was in those books. And then I write with typewriter. So for me, I had other work I was doing. I think better and I'm more creative in the morning. So I would get up in the morning, like 5:30, 6 in the morning, and write for a couple of hours before I had to do other things, get my kids going and do other work that I was doing. So that's how I made it work for me. And I also found time when I would go to activities with my kids. If I was just sitting there, then I would take those times to write, because I didn't have a lot of free time. So I kind of set up my own schedule and routine in that way.
So that's kind of similar to, I get, because people are like, how did you write another book? And I'm like, listen, because I yap all the time, obviously that's why I have a podcast show, but I am a huge audio notes person. If I'm driving, I'm already, hey, write a book about such and such, or I'll start adding things in it, like make sure you add this, make sure you add that. And then whenever I would sit down, that was my way of doing an outline. And I'm always trying to reiterate that you guys start with an outline. You remember back in old school when we made outlines?
Right. And I, with my Sophie Washington books, would have outlines. They call it in writing, you're either a plotter or a pantser. A plotter means there's some people who have detailed sticky notes and everything outlined for their whole book when you're writing a novel. And I kind of go by the seat of my pants. I'll just sit down with an idea and just start writing. But I would have like a rough outline of all of my chapter headings. And generally, if I kind of know where I want to end the book, it helps when I'm writing. So if I have the ending and the main plot points planned, then I can have a kind of a guideline to go through to help me continue on and not get stuck when I'm writing in the story. So that, because there's actually there is a diagram you can download online that will show you plot structure. So it has the beginning, the rising action, the climax. It has like a framework you can use if you're writing a novel to get your plot set up to help you get the story structured. So that's something that you could do.
Plotter
And I, but I,
or what's the other plotter or a
it's like a plot. I don't. It's like a plot diagram. If
no, no,
they
no.
Google
What were
plot,
the two you said you're either a plotter or a
oh, or a pantser, and you kind of go by the seat of your pants. And I found that for me with the Sophie Washington series, it took me maybe 6 to 8 months to write the first couple books in the series, and by the end of the series, I could write those in a month, like the draft, because it's kind of like a cookie cutter recipe. You had it, I have my framework of how I write each book. They all had 20 chapters, they had 100 pages. So I did have an outline that I kind of used to go through each thing to take you through the stories.
okay. Interesting. And I'll say this, and I don't want to keep talking about me because this is all about you, Tonya, but I will say this too, because when I wrote my book last summer, someone said something about it because I think it was like 130 something pages. And I said, listen, when you're talking about self help, a lot of times people they want to get a quick, easy, what do I need to do? How do I need to do it? So it's either you don't want to be in that weird middle category where it's too many pages where they don't finish it, and then because if you're looking to read a novel you want a novel, but if you're looking for so I love that you said that you have the structure of 20 chapters because you knew based off of what your kids were saying this is as much as I'm going to read or they
Right.
won't read the end.
Right, and they need short chapters for kids with these books that they can read through. And another thing that you mentioned is that I have found helpful is when you get those ideas, get them in the audio notes or get them in your phone, because there's been many times when I'll have a good idea and I didn't write it down, and I would have everything in my mind, just perfect. Then I would come back to it like, oh no, I can't remember this anymore. What was I thinking? So that's a good idea when you come up with something, get it down immediately. So even if you don't have time, so later you can come back to that.
Yeah, well, my life is all audio notes. Even if it's not about a book, it's like I'm immediately like, "Hey Siri, create an audio note that says." Oh, stop it, Siri, stop. She's trying to make me a note. Stop, Siri. Um, so, but I'll do that all the time, like because I want to make sure because I feel like I forget things, and I feel like the more that you do in life, the less capacity I have to remember those things. So I feel like I'm involved in so many projects. If I don't do an audio, then it's not, I'm going to forget it.
Yes, so that's a great idea.
So I was reading your bio as you were talking. So so when you were, okay, highlights foundation, and then it says that Brown Bookshelves Highlights Foundation sponsored. So go in and kind of tell us about that because a lot of people they think they write a book and then why is it not selling? And people don't understand how to get into these like on you guys her bio is like 32 pages long.
Right.
But so tell us about some of those, I guess, areas that you got in and the importance of that.
Right. Networking is key to helping you market your book and get your book out to a broader audience. And for me, during the pandemic, the Brown Bookshelf was a group of African American creators who are helping promote other Black authors. And I knew some of the members in this group from participating in conferences and other things that I used to go to, and they were authors that I look up to. So I had networked with them at events in the past. And during the pandemic, they had a chance, they put together a cohort. They got funding from the Highlights Foundation, and it was Amplify Black Stories. So I applied to be part of this group, and this was all of the top children's, or some of the top children's authors were the leaders, African American children's authors, and then they were helping mid-list and up-and-coming authors become more relevant or amplify our voices. So when I was selected in that group, I actually started my own Instagram live show called Write This, where I interviewed different authors because we were only meeting in Zoom. And I was like, well, how can I connect with these other authors? And, you know, it's hard to meet people when we're only in these little Zoom squares. So that was a great way for me to meet a lot of my other author friend, you know, become friends with many other authors. And now we help amplify each other's work. We do retreats together, and Highlights invited me to come in for to be an assistant at one of their retreats at their retreat center in Pennsylvania. So that was wonderful because many of the children's authors that you see out there go to these retreats to write their books. And actually, my book, They Built Me for Freedom, I wrote it as part of a virtual Highlights camp. I shared it at the camp, and they mentored me and encouraged me with the book, gave me feedback. And I did the edits for my book, They Built Me for Freedom, on site at Highlights when I was there helping with the camp on chapter books. And I was in my own cabin. There were deer outside the window, bunnies hopping in the fields out. So it was kind of like a full circle moment. But networking, getting yourself out to different conferences, you know, depending on the genre you write in, there's one for romance authors, children's authors. I recommend that for anybody trying to get your books out here. If you want to get them sold, not just write a book as a pet project, but get it sold to readers, then you need to network and meet other people who can help you and guide you along the path. So I've had so many people who have helped me all along the way with each step.
See, that's great advice. Great advice. Now, how also this is it was when you were talking, I was thinking about something I wanted to ask earlier, but when we were talking about structuring the book, and a lot of times people get caught up in, I guess, the aesthetics of the book, which I'm always like, you haven't even written a book yet and you're worried about the cover. I mean, I get it, whatever motivates you to get it going, but how did you come up with how you wanted, when you were talking about Sophie and the line, like what did you do to get an idea of how you wanted her to look? Does she look like one of your kids, or how did that happen?
That's a good question. Actually, my daughter's name is Sophia. So, and my kids were the age of the characters around the time that I wrote the book. So, in it, I described her as having two braids. And actually, my daughter did wear her hair similar to that. So, that's a good point. She doesn't look exactly like my children, though. And she has a little brother, and I have two sons, and his character is kind of based on them. But when I would write the books, I would write first. I did have ideas of what some of the covers would look like in my mind, and those books are self-published. So I worked with an illustrator, and I did tell him what I wanted for all the images. They have black and white images inside the books. And so he did do, whatever I said. One of the books, Sophie Washington Code One, about them in a coding competition, was purchased by Scholastic. So they bought the rights to that in 2021, and it's in a STEM program. Yeah. But for my newest book, They Built Me for Freedom, I had no idea what the visuals would look like because it's published through HarperCollins. So they bought the words that I wrote. And then I took pictures of Emancipation Park here in Houston. The book tells the story of Emancipation Park, where they had the first Juneteenth celebration, and it's in the park's voice. So the park is telling the story of how it came to be and giving the history of Juneteenth. So the illustrator lives in Florida, and I just sent pictures, and she did all kinds of research because I was just crying when I saw her beautiful illustrations. I was in the grocery store and I opened my phone. I'm like, oh my goodness, because she has pictures of the ancestors in the clouds and all these beautiful images. And she actually researched plants and butterflies here in Houston because it talks about like the metamorphosis of the park. So it has the caterpillars going to the butterflies. And she found all these plants and different things native to the
Mm.
area and did tons of research. So that was amazing for me to see her interpretation of the words.
That is, I didn't even think about that. Okay, yeah, because I know that that's something that a lot of people struggle with is whenever you're so used to doing everything yourself, and then now you sort of have where someone is helping, and I know that that's something where you're thinking, well, that's not what I was thinking or whatever. So I know sometimes letting go of that control can also be a little challenging as well. So I'm glad that you had a good experience. Okay, so the Juneteenth book, go into that because I also wanted to touch on the point of, because the difference between the fictional book where you're writing about just stories and situations that kids are going through or tweens are going through is totally different than writing something that's about an actual event. So I know when you were writing and researching, you had to be a little more straight to the point and not as spiritual and and artistic. So how did that research go and into how did the research go into writing the Juneteenth book, and what were some of the things? Did you have any challenges along the way?
Well, actually, the book, They Built Me for Freedom, is a picture book. So I write very lyrically in the
Mm,
book. And
wow.
that the difference between a picture book and it is nonfiction, but I love the creative freedom I have with this book because I love poetry. So the writing is more poetic in this book, even though, like in the back, I have something that's kind of straight prose telling you the history. But because I was able to put the story in the park's voice, I was able to be way more creative than I was in my Sophie Washington books. So even though it's a straight historical story, and I did research looking up the history of people who went to the park and way back in the day what their experiences were. And so what happened is I visited the park during the time that they were talking about making Juneteenth a national holiday. And I was saying, wow, this place is something that a lot of people don't know about. I actually got chills walking through the area and imagining my ancestors running through this park and celebrating their freedom. And some of the lines came to me that I have in the end of the book, and it's saying, singing songs of Jubilee, running free. They built me for freedom. So I was thinking of them singing songs of Jubilee, being happy, celebrating their freedom. And so those things kind of come to me when I'm going to some of these historical places. Then I go back and I do research looking at articles telling about the history. But with picture books, it's fun for me because I can put my own spin on a historical story. And I have another historical coming out. It's probably going to be 2 years because with these publishing companies, it takes forever for them to do everything. And it takes the illustrator like a year to do their part. But it's another historical. And I love writing these little picture books because I'm able to do all kinds of different things creatively. You can make them rhyme, there's all kinds of fun things that you can do to make it engaging for the child. Because, and you also want to make it fun for the parent who's reading
Mhm.
these books because they're books that are meant to be read aloud. And that's why a lot of them are actually like poetry. So for me, it's kind of a way to express myself as an artist in a different way than when I'm writing a novel or a longer book.
That is such a good point and so accurate, because that was the fun part of, I remember when my kids were little, they were grown now, but when they were little, the whole, I guess the way that you could read Dr. Seuss and you can, make it funny with, I do not like green eggs and ham, and that was the whole thing of being able to use your voice to tell the story. So I love that you mentioned that. You wanted to say something else?
And like you're saying with the green eggs and ham, yeah, a lot of these picture books have that rhyme and repetition, or you have lines that the child's going to
Mhm.
remember and it's going to make them want to read that book again and again. So when you're writing that, you're kind of thinking of that. I'm also thinking of the images that will go alongside the words, because you only have 500 to 1,000 words in the picture book. That's how long most of them are nowadays. And so you've got to use the perfect word, because even though they're short, that's something when people want to write picture books, there's a lot of work that goes into writing a picture book. It takes me hours to come up with the perfect words and the hook that's going to attract if you want to get it published with a bigger publisher, it's going to make it stand
Yeah,
out.
I love that. Yeah, each word has to be impactful because again, you want them to be able to I want, like how I still remember green eggs and ham. You want people to
Right,
still
right.
remember everything in the book. Okay, so to wrap up everything, tell us again all of the books that you have and how people can find your books. Again, I know online, but and or how people can find you. Are you open to collaborating, or do you have any big ideas that you're working on? Like, go give us all the business.
Well, my Sophie Washington chapter book series is geared to kids ages 8 to 10, and there are 13 books in the series. And they can be found, they and my book, They Built Me for Freedom, the story of Juneteenth in Houston's Emancipation Park, can be found on my website at tonyaduncanellis.com. And all online retailers, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Books a Million, anywhere that books are sold. And They Built Me for Freedom is in most Barnes and Nobles nationwide, and most booksellers as well. And then you can connect with me on social media on Instagram and Facebook at Tonya Ellis Books. And I'm on X. I'm not on there that much, but my X is at Tonya D. Ellis.
Yeah, I keep trying. I'm never. I don't know why. And even on Threads, and you would think I would like to write, so I would, but I don't.
Right. And it's funny. It is. I don't like writing on there. And it's also the tone is a little different. It's kind of people complaining and things for me, or the energy. I don't really vibe with the energy on those, because I am on Threads, but it's kind of just a repeat of things from
Same,
Instagram
same.
that I
Yeah,
just put on
I'm not a
there.
complainer either, and it just seems like everybody when I see like Twitter posts, they're always like you said negative, or it's bashing someone, or someone's going viral for something. I don't know. I don't like that. Yeah, same thing. See, that's why
Mhm.
we it was the vibe. It was the vibe.
Yeah,
Because we were already like,
yeah.
hey, get us a cute picture underneath this Channel 2 sign.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yes, yes, I love it. I love it. Okay, so projects coming up. I know you said it's a hush hush thing coming up in 2 years, but anything else that you're working on?
And I have another project coming up. It's still in the works and it hasn't been bought on. I'm very I love the rodeo culture here in Houston. So I went to the Black Cowboy Museum, and I'm working on some projects kind of a Western theme projects. I'm excited
Is
about
that the one
those.
in Missouri City?
It's in Richmond. I think it's in Richmond. There's a Black Cowboy Museum in Richmond, and the man who runs it has all these cool artifacts.
Yeah, I went there. I got invited when they did. So I think year before last, and I went and I covered the rodeo because they invited me to the rodeo, and I talked to the lady and the guy who was like whatever the captain.
Yeah, you know him. Yeah.
So
I've met so many people that have met him. So this is interesting.
okay,
Yeah.
well, yeah, because I was like, why I'm coming out. Oh, well, we got you VIP. I'm like, okay, I'll be there. I'll be there.
Yeah, yay.
I know, I know, I love it. So, you guys, I will also have all of Tonya's clickable links, everything that she just said as well, even X. We will let y'all follow her on X, formerly Twitter, and then also, do you have a workshop or do you do anything, or have you thought about that
I
for writing
do
books? Mhm.
one-on-one consultations, and people can DM me if they want to get information about publishing. And on my Instagram page, I put a lot of information about publishing tips. I have a blog on my website where I give information, a lot of free information. So you can check that out. And then I do consultation.
Okay, perfect. Just asking because I know whenever you share knowledge with people, they're like, "Oh, well, I need more." Okay, well, you can now you can I go to a certain point of free stuff and then after that it's like, "Okay, now you can pay for my
Right.
time."
That's what I'm saying. They can, if they go through my Instagram, there's a lot of free information about self-publishing if they want information. And then if they want more content from me or me to talk with them, then I do consultation.
Okay, perfect. All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for all of the see how I got y'all some more free information right there. So thank
And
you.
also, before I leave, I have free for kids downloadable worksheets, coloring pages. There for my Sophie Washington series. There are trailers that are free, so they can have hours of entertainment. And I have teacher guides for They Built Me for Freedom and my Sophie Washington series that are free on my website.
Okay. And that is TonyaDuncanEllis.com.
Yes,
Got
yes.
it. Okay. And I'll have it scroll down to the podcast notes too, because it'll be in there as well. So thank you so much, Tonya, for sharing your story. And I cannot wait to see all of the future projects as well. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Holly, for having me. It's been fun.